shared with you before that following high school, I took 2 gap years and worked on a mission ship. As I was preparing to join the ship, I had created this image in my mind of what it was going to be like. I was going to be this, mariner working on the deck of this ship, bronzed, tanned, using tools that I'd never used before, kind of being like, I had this image that I was going to become like this officer, this, naval officer. When I got to the ship, we were given our work assignments, and I was relegated to the book exhibition. Part of the ministry of the ship was to provide literature, Christian literature in the local languages. So each port that we would arrive in, we were open to the public. And as we approached a new country, we would receive shipments of books in that local language. And so we were open to the public. People could come on board and buy books, Christian books, in their own language. That's where I was working. That did not fit the image that I had. And for most people on the ship, usually you were on a 2-year commitment. And so you would spend 8 months in 3 different work assignments. I spent 2 years in the book exhibition. They didn't move me, except for one 8-month period where I was still in the book exhibition department, but they moved me down into the book holds, so I never saw the light of day, and I was just filling orders down in the basement of the ship, basically. So I give you all that background just to tell you that twice a year, I misspoke, once a year, the ship would go into dry dock. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the concept, it's exactly what it sounds like. The ship sails into this huge floating dock, which then lifts the ship up out of the water. And for 2 weeks, extreme maintenance is done on the ship. So cleaning the hull of barnacles and other growth, doing any of the interior work and preparation that the ship needed structurally to be able to perform for another year. So I was kind of looking forward to the dry dock, because I knew dry dock, they usually kept all the men on board and sent the women to shore. And I heard all these stories about dry dock, how the food was so much better than usual. And the shifts were long. It was six days a week, 12-hour shifts, but great camaraderie. And because the ventilation systems on the ship, all the electrical power was turned off, people would pull their mattresses out onto the deck and sleep on the deck, and it was just this incredible, manly kind of life-giving experience. So the first dry dock for which I was on board, I was sent on shore to run a book table in a local mall. It was 2 of the most boring weeks of my life. When the second dry dock came around, during my second year, I was informed that I was being assigned to the ship, so I was going to stay on board. So I thought, finally, my vision of who I was going to become and what I was going to get to do and experience for 2 weeks was going to come true. Even if it was for a shorter time, I was going to get to experience. And I have told you before about what my assignment was. You may not remember. First day, the engine room officers, I'd been assigned to the engine room, and the engine room officer on duty got myself and 4 other pathetic book exhibition laborers, and he said, "You are going to be cleaning fuel tanks, the ship fuel tanks." And I was like, okay. I had no idea what that meant. Fuel tanks on a ship are basically rooms, fairly large rooms that have been filled with crude oil, and we got to go into those rooms and scrape the sludge off the walls and off the floor, and scrape the sludge into buckets and pass the buckets out to others who would dispose of them wherever they were supposed to dispose of them. And then after we were done with all that, we got to wipe down the walls and the floor with diesel fuel. It was so enjoyable. And it was dark. It was pitch dark. These are rooms that are airtight, right, normally. And I should add one detail. Each room had a false floor. It was about 3 feet off the actual floor, and you access the lower part through manholes. And most of the sludge was down below, and that's where you got to climb down, crawl down there, and it was only about 3 feet high, so on your hands and knees for 12 hours a day. You could scoop sludge into a bucket. I was finally in the department I had wanted to be in, and it was the worst job of my life. It was the most miserable. It didn't meet any of my expectations. It definitely did not fit with my plan or my vision. And so we're working 7 to 7, and then there was an additional hour at the end of each day just to get cleaned up. It literally took an hour in the shower at the end of each day just to be semi-presentable for the next day. To be honest, it never crossed my mind that though this job was so miserable, that the officers of the ship had chosen me for this job because they hated me. It might have felt that way sometimes, but I knew that wasn't true. I knew they hadn't given me this assignment because they disliked me. And though I did look at the jobs that others had longingly, I understood that the needs of the ship, the purpose of the ship, was far beyond me. It wasn't just about making me happy. In fact, it wasn't at all about making me happy. That wasn't the purpose, that wasn't the goal. The goal of the ship and her leaders and officers was to enable me to participate in bringing about the greater purpose of the ship ministry, which was to present the gospel to people, to bring souls to Jesus, and to encourage his disciples. Today is part 2 of our series called God Has a Plan. We're examining the nature of God's plans through the biblical account of the life of Joseph. And if you do not have a hard copy Bible with you this morning and you'd like to borrow one for this service to follow along, the ushers are coming back down the aisles now with some copies. If you just raise your hand, they'll be glad to give you one. Last week, reading from Genesis chapter 37, we considered 3 truths about God's plans. Firstly, that God's plans are carried out through broken people and broken families. Joseph's immediate family and his heritage was incredibly broken. Secondly, God's plans include you. They include us, but they're not just about you or us. In other words, we are not at the center of God's plans. God's plans are not to make us happy. That's not his end goal or end purpose. And thirdly, God's plans require the lenses of trust and faithfulness. Because usually we can't see the end game. And the path on which and through which God leads his people often seems torturous, and it doesn't make sense. And because we don't see or understand the end goal, we need the lenses of trust in him and then faithfulness. What he asks of us is not success. Remember, we talked about this last week. What God asks of his people is simply to be faithful to him and to his leading. Today, we're going to continue with 3 more realities about God's plan, and we're still going to be in chapter 37. We haven't even gotten away from chapter 37 of Genesis yet. And as I said last week, I realize this is a longer text than we generally read on a Sunday morning, and we read it last week. But I'm going to read it again because there's some other nuances in it that I'm going to bring out today. Chapter 37, beginning with verse 2. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he'd been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams that he had had and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he said it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're grazing their flocks?" "They've moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So, when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There's no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" When they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I'll continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. The first principle today is that God's plan is good, but includes hardship and pain. Because we so easily slip into believing the lie that God's plans are for my comfort and happiness, when we encounter suffering, we immediately question whether this can possibly be His plan. And if we believe that lie, then when we face hardship or suffering, we blame God, or we accuse Him, or assume that He is not good or loving. Like I could have had that reaction to the officers on the ship where I served, right? "You gave me this lousy assignment, therefore you must hate me. You do not desire my well-being." As I mentioned last week, Joseph is given a glimpse of God's plan through his dreams, but almost immediately his life goes downhill. Everything falls apart. But in this text, the author includes a little detail that at first glance seems incidental, maybe unnecessary. It certainly appears like it doesn't further the plot, but there's a deeper meaning behind it. So Joseph is out in the field searching for his brothers, and they're not where he expected them to be. And so with no cell phone or Life 360 or satellite positioning, Joseph's just wandering aimlessly around the countryside. And here comes this nameless man. We don't know who he is. We're given no context. But this random individual, and notice the text. It says, "This man found Joseph." Now, we would expect it to be the opposite. We would expect it to read that Joseph, as he's wandering about, finds a man. But he doesn't. This man finds him and asks him, what are you looking for? And so it happens that this stranger not only encounters Joseph in this vast open country, but then he just happened to know who Joseph's brothers were and just happened to have overheard them saying where they were going, to Dothan, which is about 15 miles away from Shechem. So that's not a lot if we're talking about interstate highways and cars, but it is a lot when you're talking about walking. I don't know who this man was. He could have been an angel, or he was just a normal man used by God, but the phrasing of this story and its apparently unnecessary inclusion in this account makes it clear. God sent this man to keep moving Joseph toward the destination that he had intended. And that immediate destination is going to be tough and profoundly painful for Joseph. Like, it doesn't seem like a good destination ultimately. Now, we also have to remember that's not the final destination. But the path to the final destination, which is good, I might add, that path leads through suffering. And God made sure that Joseph got there. It's one of the ways that the author, him including that little detail about this nameless individual, shows us, reminds us, this is God's plan, right? God is moving Joseph in this direction. A verse that is often taken out of context is in Romans 8, verse 28, right? And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God, I'm going to go on to verse 29. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. So we all know that first verse, right? That God can make all things work together for good. Now there are some modifiers there though, right? To those who love him and those who are called according to his purpose. So God's going to work all things for good for those people. But what we also often miss, because then we don't go on to memorize verse 29, what is the ultimate good? In other words, all these myriad things that God is working together for the good of these people, what is that good? So what is that goal? To be conformed to the image of God's Son. That's what verse 29 fills out for us. That's the good toward which God is working all things in our lives for us to be like Jesus. You've heard me use this example before, but I'll just repeat it briefly. I like baking. I like making brownies. I have a recipe I really like. I know it by heart because in Brazil, brownie mixes are terrible. They're really terrible. So you have to make them from scratch, right? So I know it by heart. And if you separate out all those ingredients, right, individually taken, they're not all pleasant, right? I mean, some people like plain sugar. My son Micah used to anyway. Found him when he was 4 years old, hiding under a table in the kitchen. He'd gotten hold of the sugar canister and he was just... Most of us, that would get old pretty quickly. Raw eggs, not a fan. Some people are. Flour, have you ever taken just a spoonful of flour? It's not a pleasant experience. How about a teaspoon of salt, just straight into the mouth? Also something that my son Micah might do. He is a salt aficionado. But when all of those ingredients are mixed together in the proper proportion, and then, this is the hard thing, right? Subjected to heat, then the end result is good. So individually taken, some of those experiences, some of those ingredients are not pleasant. But in conjunction and in the right heat, proportion, and timing, the end result is beneficial. So God's plan is good, but it includes hardship and pain. And if the ultimate goal is for God's people to be made like his Son Jesus, if Jesus suffered and we're being made like him, would it not make sense that suffering would be part of that journey and process? The reason I'm bringing this up to you, it's not the first time, but the reason I'm bringing it up to all of us, I'm reminding all of us of this. It's not that it's necessarily comforting, but it's that the danger is if we're not prepared, if we're not ready for the idea that suffering can be part of God's plan for us, then when it comes, we run the risk, right, of turning our backs on God because we don't have the right expectations for what he's wanting to do in us or through us. And remember, through that pain and suffering, what is he asking of us? Not success, but faithfulness. The second principle of the day is this: sin may frustrate God's plan, but it will never overcome it. I remember various times playing around with my sons when they were kids, right? And I'd be walking down the hallway or something, and they would try to block my path and say, you can't go by, right? Now, I'm going to get by, right? I'm going to. Now, it might, because I love them, right? Because I care for them, I'm not going to treat them like the offensive tackle of the opposing team, right? But I will slow down. And if we're playing around, then obviously it's a joke, but I will find a way to move them. So I might slow my pace a little bit. It's not ultimately going to keep me from getting past if I want to get past. Joseph's brothers, in this part of the story, do some truly contemptible things. First, they straight out want to kill Joseph, right? That's their initial plan, fueled by hatred and jealousy and envy. And then Reuben, the eldest of the brothers, he makes a ploy to save Joseph's life. But then Judah, another leader among them, incites the other brothers, no, let's sell him. And there's an interesting point here that just kind of reveals a little bit of the character of the brothers too, as if we didn't already know it's bad. They throw him in the cistern. What's the next thing that the text says they did? And they sat down to have lunch. You know, it's like, not only are they treating their brother this way, but they're saying, hey, it's time to eat. Let's enjoy our meal. Life goes on. Then, after they sell Joseph, they deceive their father into thinking that Joseph is dead. Even their dad's misery isn't enough to make them tell the truth. These are not good dudes. We need to be clear that God doesn't condone their sin. And God doesn't ordain their sin. The context now and the context later makes clear that their actions were evil. And I emphasize this because we need to avoid the fatalistic thinking that would argue like this: God's plans will always come true, right? And they're good, so it doesn't matter if I sin or not. My part that I'm playing in it bears no reference because God's going to make everything, he's going to turn everything to good in the end. But on the other hand, we also need to avoid the belief that human sin or rebellion can derail God's plan. If God's overarching corporate plan that we talked about last week is to build his family and his church, and if his individual plan is to make each of us more like Jesus, then there's nothing that any human being can do to prevent that plan. And the cross of Jesus, which today we live in the light of the cross, we look back at history to the cross. So Joseph, he's still looking forward to the cross, even though he doesn't realize it. Is there any more clear indication than the cross that evil efforts can't stop God? I mean, the enemy of the church, the enemy of humanity, Satan himself, incites humanity, right, to kill Jesus. That's the idea. That's evil, right? Yes, part of God's plan, but the intent in the hearts of the people who did it was evil and rebellious. And yet out of that evil and that rebellion, Jesus Christ rises to glory and redemption and salvation. So it doesn't mean that on this earth we don't oppose evil or that we refuse to speak out against sin or injustice or perversion. We do because evil in and of itself is not God's plan. But evil can't stop his plan, and he's able and does redeem the evil that rebellious people commit to bring about his ultimate purposes. And we're going to see this so clearly at the end of Joseph's story. In fact, Joseph is going to say these words to his brothers: what you intended for evil, the Lord intended for good. That's a few weeks away. Years away in Joseph's life, weeks away in ours. Thirdly and finally for today, this might sound like a strange statement, but we'll get into it. God's plan does not include your robe. We're going to see a theme in Joseph's life about the robes and coats that he wears. But none are more poignant than this first one. The ornate robe his father made for him, which communicated not just Jacob's favoritism, but also Joseph's status. And this robe elevates Joseph above his brothers. Even though he was the younger one, we pick up from the text, he had a position of authority over his brothers, right? He was the one reporting back to his father about his brothers. He was the one that his father sends to check up on the brothers. Sort of almost like a supervisory role. The robe becomes an icon of Joseph's identity, right? A replacement of who he actually is. And at the end of the chapter, we see Jacob accepting the blood-stained robe as what? As evidence of Joseph's death. He never sees a body. He never sees anything else and doesn't hear any story, right? I mean, all the brothers say is, here's a robe, we found it. It's stained with blood, and that's enough for Jacob to decide that his son is dead. So even by his father, this robe is confused with Joseph's being, with his identity. There's also implication in this text that Joseph's kind of proud of the robe. We already know he maybe had some issues with arrogance, perhaps, in the way that he shared these dreams with his brothers. But then the text goes out of its way just to affirm that when they stripped the coat off of him, there's like a parenthesis there, the ornate robe that he was wearing. A little bit questioning almost. He goes off on this long journey and he wears, the most precious garment that he has. Joseph likes his robe. He likes the way it looks. He likes the way it feels. He likes how it exalts him and sets him above his brothers. And what happens? As God's plan moves forward, Joseph's robe is stripped from him, becoming proof of his death, and we never hear about this robe again. And yet, at the end of the chapter, when it seems that Joseph is forgotten and his fate is sealed, his death accepted by his father, we're reminded that Joseph, the real Joseph, is still alive, and God is still moving his plan forward. So let me ask you this. What's your robe? In what talent, accomplishment, role, or purpose have you tried to establish your identity? And I'll just add to that, your false identity. There may be different ones throughout the arc of our lives, right? Because the fallen human self is constantly, desperately seeking meaning, status, and identity. And so throughout the course of our lives, we may try on different robes. We're always tempted to find our status, our meaning in something other than what we simply are. And we want it to be something that exalts us, right? Something that makes us stand out, something that makes us better than those around us, that makes us special. the more I've contemplated this, it's actually a little bit discouraging because I keep discovering more robes. Like, I have a pretty big wardrobe when it comes to robes of false identity. And it's interesting how God allows certain events to happen, and he uses those to remind me or to remind us of ways that we are putting our identity or trying to find our identity in something other than who we are. Two that I didn't even realize that I had. But God brought these to my attention about 3 years ago, shortly after my family and I had moved here to North Canton. The first one had to do with being unique because of where I was from. Brazil is a more exotic place, no offense, than Canton, Ohio. And 3 years ago, more or less, Pastor Sean and I had gone to a conference in Dallas at Watermark Church. And I remember when we were checking in, they had our names and they said, "Where are you from?" And I was like, I had the br syllable on the tip of my tongue. And Pastor Sean said, "Ohio." And the person checking us in said, "Oh," gave us our name tags. And I looked at the name tag and it said, Nathaniel Fawcett, Ohio. Let me just be clear, okay? My family, we love Northeast Ohio and have been so blessed to live here. And we're so grateful for this community. Last week it was a little hard with the winter weather, but you know, we're still moving in that direction. But I'm just being honest, like realizing that I had found a lot of my identity in being from an exotic place, a different place. It made me stand out. It made me unique. It made me different. I mean, people might not interact with it, but every time that I would say to somebody, you know, in my former life, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Brazil." There would always be some kind of reaction. And I liked that. Like that was a robe I was wearing. I'm cool. I'm Brazilian. Another thing, another robe that I feel like I'm always having to take it off, but it's arrogance and it's pride. It's like puffs me up a little bit about having the opportunity to serve in a larger church. When I first moved here with my family, there was a little bit of name recognition. Sometimes it would happen. I'd be out in public. There a couple times people saw me. Like, this never happened in Brazil. Never, ever happened, right? And I'd be walking around town and say, "Hey, you're my pastor," or "Hey, aren't you the new pastor at First Friends Church?" And, you know, it's kind of this little jolt of, "Hey, I'm special. Hey, I'm unique," you know. And in Brazil, where I did live previously, within the missionary community at least, there was some name recognition of the name Fawcett because my parents had been there so long and had served so faithfully. And so again, I remember Ethan's freshman year at Laterno University, and it was our first year here in North Canton. I went down to visit him for a special weekend that they have there. It's not homecoming. It's called something else weird and bizarre. But and so I went, Hootenanny, that's what it's called, Hootenanny weekend. It is Texas after all. And so again, I had a very similar reaction. You know, I went in I had registered, I went in to get my name tag and everything, and I walked in, and the person asked me my name, my last name, and I said Fawcett. And I realized something like, if I had thought about it intentionally ahead of time, I wouldn't have expected a reaction to my name. But when she showed, and then she said, "Oh, are you a parent? Are you a, you know, why are you here?" And I realized, like, oh, I like being recognized. And when there was no recognition of my name at all, I felt like diminished. So what is it for you? Is it a job? Is it your family? Is it a role that you fill or a talent you have? Maybe it's an honor that you have received. Maybe it's being known in the community. Maybe it's your salary. Maybe it's your looks. Maybe it's who you're dating. Joseph's robe covered up his true self, who he really was. And our robes do the same. And if we live out our false identities, or we're confused as to who we truly are at the core of our being, then we'll not understand our purpose in God's plan, right? We're wearing false robes, and it's going to be natural for us to put ourselves at the center of God's plan. We'll be consistently confused about trust in him, and perhaps more importantly, we will always be insecure about our value and our place. Because if our identity or our robes are in what we're good at, there will always be somebody better than you at what you're good at. Always. So if your self-worth comes from that talent or that ability, somebody does it better. There's always somebody that does it better. Now you might ask, well, why does it matter if we live out a false identity? Living out a false identity has impact and consequences for you as an individual, for us, but it also impacts the community around us. So let me illustrate it this way. The first year that I coached soccer while living in Baytown, Texas, and teaching at Baytown Christian Academy, I've told you this before, we had a perfect record. It was perfect. We were 0-13. Not only were we perfect in being 0-13, but we were perfect in that we never scored a goal. So there was a 0 in that goal category as well. It's quite remarkable. It was a remarkable achievement. So obviously we were terrible. We were horrible, right? This is my first year of coaching. And because we were so horrible, we didn't have anybody, barring one player, we didn't really have anybody that had a truly assigned position, right? Because no one was good, so it didn't really matter. So we had rotated in practices and even in games. I had rotated different people, trying them out at goalkeeper. And I realized that soccer is not nearly as big here as football. But soccer, but we play it with our feet. It's confusing. But in soccer, for those of you who may not know, I'll just tell you, there's only 2 players on the field who can touch the ball with their hands, and both of them are goalkeepers, right? And so there was one individual who I had rotated through goal a couple times, but this game he was not playing keeper. And we were doing really well this game. It was the second half, and we were only down by 3 goals. It was 3-0, and I was like, that's not respectable, but it's not totally absurdly awful like our other games had been. So let's try to hold it here, right? And there was a play late in the second half, and we were going to equal our season best, okay, losing by only 3. And one of the few times that the ball actually went to the other side of the field, like the opponent's side of the field, their defender, just behind midfield, just ran up and just, because he had been bored, right? He hadn't touched the ball the whole game. He just booted it as hard as he could. And it went way up in the air. And I'm watching from the sideline. And, I'm not the best at math and geometry and parabolas, whatever those are. And so in my limited mathematical mind, I watch and I see that there is one of our players that's standing exactly where this ball is going to land. And he's inside the goal box. He is not the goalie. And I'm watching it. And I even had time to whisper to my assistant coach, he's going to catch the ball. Boom. He didn't move. Until after he caught it, and then he did the soccer thing where you did something really bad and you pretend like you didn't do anything, So. An additional irony to the story is, had he been playing goalkeeper, there was no way he would have caught that ball. But regardless, he caught it. Penalty kick, 4-0. And, in the greater scheme of things, that's a soccer game. Does it really matter that much? No, it doesn't. But in real life, if we're confused about our identity, if we're not sure who we are in this life, there's going to be fallout for us, and there's going to be fallout for others as well. So we need to know who we are, and we need to lay down our robes. So that begs the question, right? Who are we? In John chapter 1, we're told who we are. At least those of us who have given our lives to Jesus. If we had decided to surrender to him. Because the Apostle John tells us, a verse that I've quoted many, many times, John 1:12, yet to all who did receive him, he's talking about Jesus, to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ, that's your identity. A daughter or a son of the Most High God. There's nothing you can do to earn that, to deserve that, or to enhance that. And one of the reasons actually that rubs us the wrong way, like being a child of the King isn't enough, is that there are millions of us. And God doesn't have favorites. But we want favorites. Like Joseph, we want to stand out. We want to be different. And what this verse also shows us is that identity is conferred. It's not earned. If you think about your last name, did you earn that? Did you earn your birth? Did you earn your physical parents? No. Identity is conferred, it's not earned. Our brokenness screams to be better than others, to look down on others, to exalt ourselves, to find meaning and identity in that exaltation. But that leads to deep, deep insecurity. Laying down our robes at the feet of Jesus brings us into his embrace where we rest as secure children of God. What's your robe? I understand that laying our robes down, stripping them off, it's terrifying because we think of it as who we are. And if I don't have this, if I don't cling onto this, then that's the rationale. It's like, who am I? What am I? Where's my value? Stripping off our robes can feel like death because it is the death of self. But laying down that false identity is the only way to be at peace in the arms of God. And I'll add this, it's less painful to lay down our robe than to have it stripped off of us. Joseph had to have his robe stripped off of him. And God, the Father, is inviting each of us to come voluntarily and lay those robes at his feet. Now, that doesn't mean that we quit everything we're doing, that we necessarily give up these things. I mean, maybe we do. There's something, if that's the way the Lord's working in you, then that's what you need to do. But it's a reordering internally in our heart and our mind. Like, what am I grasping onto? What am I depending on to make me stand out? If it's anything other than being a daughter or a son of the Most High God, and having that identity conferred upon us by the Son of God himself, Jesus, because it's through him, right, that we become children of God, then we need to lay that down, whatever that may be. Anything gets in the way. So that's really the invitation this morning. It's kind of two sides of the same coin. The one side is to lay down our false identity, and the other side is to receive and celebrate the identity that the Lord God has conferred upon his children. And we're all invited to do that this morning. I know that we can sometimes belabor this point, but I encourage you, if the Lord's working and speaking and the Holy Spirit is ministering and challenging you in this area, to put a physical action to the internal process. Come to the altar. Come to the altar. This is actually the last Sunday where we will be doing this. If you want prayer, come to this side of the altar. If you want to worship alone, go to this side of the altar, because as of next week, we'll be instituting and launching our new altar prayer format with prayer ministers off to the side. But for today, there's a false identity or false robes that you need to lay down at the feet of Jesus. You're invited to come to the altar. And if you'd like someone to pray over you and with you about that, come to this side. Otherwise, come to this side.